No one knew exactly what went down in the schoolyard that day, but one thing is certain: the neighborhood will never be the same. There was no limit to Miss Mary's love. She and her husband, a retired Amtrak mechanic named Larry Beard, raised 18 children of their own, 10 kids and 8 boys, the youngest of whom is now 9. But even with all those kids, Miss Mary still had time for her many friends in her neighborhood in the Bronx, a part of New York City. Miss Mary, at 50, was plump and smiling. She blew dry her long, straight hair for special occasions. Otherwise, she twisted it up into a bun. She sometimes wore a brown, fuzzy coat that her friends joked made her look like Fozzie Bear, and she carried a black pocketbook, straining at the seams, that could magically produce everything from meeting agendas and safety pins to band-aids and Tylenol. Miss Mary's smile was so beautiful that when she frowned, you would stand up straight, run to class, do whatever it was she told you to do, just so she would smile at you again. Miss Mary and her family had lived in the Forest Houses projects for nearly 20 years, and everyone there knew her. If your mother needed a cake pan, Miss Mary would lend you one. Linda, 39, borrowed one pan so many times that Miss Mary said to Linda's daughter, "Tell your mother to keep it. If I need it, I'll borrow it from you." She was on the PTA at the middle school and the elementary school. Sometimes she cooked breakfast in the basement at She was on the PTA at the middle school and at the elementary school. Sometimes she cooked breakfast in the basement kitchen at the housing project where she lived and served it to the hungry. But one thing about Miss Mary, she never minded her own business. Once, a man trying to break into a window of an apartment turned around and asked her just what exactly she thought she was looking at. It turned out that the man lived there and had locked himself out. And Miss Mary said, "You should be glad I'm looking. What if somebody was breaking into the house?" The man backed down. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "You're right. Thank you." If Miss Mary was sitting on one of the park benches on Trinity Avenue, outside the apartment tower where the Beards lived on the 5th floor, parents knew they didn't have to worry about their children playing outside. Miss Mary would watch everyone's kids as if they were her own. If she saw a little kid out by himself, she would chase him on home. If she saw a fight, which happened often, she would break it up. No one ever have guessed that it would be her good Samaritan impulses that would lead to such a tragedy. Normal day. The weather was finally nice in New York City, and Miss Mary was sitting on the park bench outside her building, waiting for her best friend, Gloria. They were going to the market, Western beef, and then to the dollar store to get chocolate pudding and marshmallow pies for the kids. Across the street was the schoolyard of the elementary school, PS 146, where 3 of Miss Mary's young sons went, and on the next block down was IS 301, where her 13-year-old daughter, Yemily, and Yemily's friend, Stina, were in 6th grade. The last bell rang before 3, and Yemily and Stina started walking to the store to buy pineapple soda. Yemily, whom everyone calls Yaya, is tall, slender, and tough, with hair that stands up like a lion's mane. She doesn't say much except to note that she plays tackle football. She wants to be a lawyer, but she avoids the classes for smart kids. Stina takes those. If you ask Yaya what she wants to tell the world about herself, she says, "Don't come near me." Stina has intricate braids that creep along her skull, weaving under and over each other. She is skinny, but it's easy to see that she's tough too. Stina has simmering feud with another older high school girl who claimed that Stina's brother was trying to beat up her brother. The high school girl threatened to hit Stina's brother, which upset Stina because the high school girl was so much bigger than either of them. Who started it? The fateful day when Yaya, Stina, and their friends reached the tree-shaped corner of the block where the elementary school sits. The older girl appeared. She said something to Stina that Stina was telling the story later did not want to repeat because it was too rude. Yaya says Stina hit high school girl in the face and she deserved it. Stina says she didn't hit the other older girl, but either way, everyone started drifting towards the PS 146 schoolyard. One of the neighborhood boys egged them on. She wants to fight, y'all! She wants to fight, y'all! He taunted Stina. The schoolyard is pure inner city, a sea of asphalt in front of a squat, ugly school with burglar bars. It is dotted with basketball hoops and surrounded by a tall chain-linked fence. And the only color comes from a series of murals painted by Yaya's class when she was in 5th grade, the year the World Trade Center fell. On the biggest segment of wall set apart from all the rest is Yaya's mural of the New York City skyline at sunset, with red and white billowing stripes on either side. It was in front of this wall that the fight broke out. We started throwing our hands and I took a swing at her, says Stina. Soon the fight became a brawl involving at least 10 people Yaya can list by name. Cousins, siblings, friends of both Stina and the older girl, and a bunch of people she didn't know. Yaya says she did not get into it until Stina was knocked to the ground. I felt like if I didn't jump in, my friend wasn't going to trust me anymore, says Yaya. And she's my best friend. Yaya went right for the older girl, swinging her fists. All around her, people were fighting. Quanta, Stina's little brother, was getting kicked. One of Stina's friends picked Stina up with one hand and pounded a girl with the other. Mary gets involved. It was then that when the crowd of onlookers parted to make way for Miss Mary, she was not running, but was walking fast, straight into the melee, where she grabbed Yaya by the hood of her gray sweatshirt. Some people say that Miss Mary tried to stop the fight. A boy kicked her. Others say she dropped to her knees, and some people said they saw a girl jump on her back and punch her from behind. I think the girl was trying to get at me, Yaya says. It was not long, maybe a minute, before Miss Mary emerged from the circle of people. She was breathing hard, and she went over to the chain-link fence and held onto it, slumped over, her chest heaving up and down. Gradually, people started to notice that Miss Mary was not okay. The circle opened, and the fight stopped. Yaya had never seen her mother have a bad asthma attack before. Her mother, who put chicken or ribs on the table every night, who got antsy if she had 2 minutes to relax, who charged down the halls at school with her bulging pocketbook. So at that moment, Yaya didn't realize the seriousness of her mom's condition. She was more worried about Stina, who'd gotten knocked around in the fight and began to walk her friend home. Meanwhile, the schoolyard filled with teachers, security guards, and people from Miss Mary's building. The older girls who had been fighting fled. Gloria came running up to the fence. I can't breathe, Miss Mary told her, and then she collapsed. I can't breathe, she said. And again to Larry, her husband, who was down on the asphalt at her side. Stina, meanwhile, turned out to be just bruised, and Yaya headed back to her own house. At the schoolyard, she saw a large circle of people in an ambulance with flashing lights. Yaya stopped. She did not want to get any closer. I was too scared, she says. When she is asked what she thought was happening, she just shakes her head and looks at the ground. Yaya went up to her apartment where one of her older sisters told her what had happened. Their mother was dead. The medical examiner reported that Miss Mary died of an asthma attack following intervention in an altercation, which means that if she hadn't tried to break up the fight, she probably would have not died. The neighborhood mourns. Miss Mary was a Jehovah's Witness, but her church was not nearly big enough to accommodate all the people who came to her funeral. To begin with, there were the children and the grandchildren. Then there were the people from the neighborhood. Then there were the VIPs like the school district superintendent and a representative from the borough president's office. Miss Mary was well loved in her own right, but the way she died made her an outright hero. I think the kids knew their mother was important, a family friend says, But I don't think they realized how important until they saw how many people loved her. Life is different now in the Beard home. Yaya's father, a quiet, understanding man with a peaceful air, cooks the dinners. Sometimes he wears a t-shirt with a photo of Miss Mary on the front and a photo on the back of Belinda, his daughter, who died when she was 23, also of an asthma attack. Mama of the big old family, the front says. Daddy's little girl, the back says. Now that he takes care of both the children and the grandchildren, Larry has his own nickname, Grandpa Mama. Larry seems almost not to realize that there has been a lot of talk around the neighborhood about who was responsible for Miss Mary's death. Some people say it was the school security guards, who witnesses say were nowhere to be found when the fight started. Some say it was the fault of the older girls, who have never been seen in the neighborhood again. But hardest of all for Yaya and Stina is the idea that they might be to blame. Yaya's older sister tells Yaya that it was not her fault. But, Yaya says, staring down at the blacktop where it happened, and where 2 months later her brother and Stina's brother are now playing basketball. I still say it is. Daquan, an 11-year-old who is also playing basketball, complains that he doesn't like it that now every time there's a problem, his principal brings up Miss Mary's name to remind the students of the dire consequences of fighting. On the other hand, he says, what happened to Miss Mary should teach people a lesson. It taught some people a lesson, Yaya says, meaning herself. I learned that if it's a fight between your friends, you gotta walk away from it. But if it's family, you can get involved. My mother told us we have to stick by each other. She told us not to betray each other for nobody.